Hello, everyone. Today we are moving on in our discussion of African American history, and we are looking specifically at World War I and the African American contribution to the war. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So presidential politics before the war were giving no favors to African Americans. They had been frustrated with Republicans who had elected William McKinley, but after the assassination of William McKinley in 1901, Theodore Roosevelt's going to become president. He's going to disband three companies of black soldiers. Then Taft, his successor, is going to tolerate black voter suppression in the South and encourage the Republican Party to become, or to be, lily white, as he called it. And then black supporters were going to try to kind of go with Roosevelt and the Progressive Party as Roosevelt broke away from the Republican Party to run against Taft in the 1912 election. However, he was denied, the black voters were denied access to the convention. So this party that had been the party of Lincoln, the party who had successfully freed the slaves, who were attempting to take back some of the authority in the South, now no longer cares about the plight of African Americans. And this comes as their political power is shrinking all over the country due to voter suppression, especially throughout the South. So in 1912, Woodrow Wilson is elected, and Wilson is a Democrat. He is a Southerner, and even though he is a progressive candidate, and a lot of his policies are good in the sense that they're progressive and helpful to people, Wilson is not a friend to African Americans. He had been, however, supported by W.E.B. Du Bois, who felt that he had the best policies to help African Americans. However, or he had, I guess, the best potential to help African Americans. However, again, he was a Southern racist. He had been raised in the racist South, and that it kind of carried over with him. He segregated the federal workforce, meaning that all people throughout the entire country that worked anywhere in a federal office, whether it's the post office or the military, had to remain segregated at all times. So segregated bathrooms at work, segregated workspaces, and things of that nature. So he did segregate the federal workforce, which was not a lot of African Americans in the workforce because, again, going back to Taft, had purged a lot of black people from the party and from political positions, especially throughout the South, in this effort to make the Republican Party lily white. Wilson, that is, also famously held a screening of the very racist movie Birth of a Nation, which is a D.W. Griffith film. It's a film in 1915 that is going to really paint African Americans after the Civil War in a very bad light. And so it's going to be very negative for African Americans. It is very factually incorrect. It is intentionally celebratory of the Ku Klux Klan and other groups like them. And it's going to be screened at the White House, and that is all due to the feelings and the opinions of Wilson. So then World War I is going to come along, and we're going to see Woodrow Wilson, who is able to avoid the war throughout most of his presidency. In fact, it's one of the reasons that he won re-election in 1916. However, he was unable to keep Americans out of the war as German submarines continually attacked American ships. And so as American lives were lost, we were dragged into World War I. Most of the African Americans at the time that were asked and dealing with the conversation about going to war, most African Americans did support the war and supported fighting in the war. Again, similar to what we've seen in the past, African Americans believed that they could earn respect by fighting in a war, by fighting and potentially even dying or being willing to die for the country that they're in. It would show that they were a part of the country and ideally show that they intended to stay here and help in any way that they could. So they wanted to fight that war to earn respect. Many white people, especially Southerners, are going to reject this idea. They do not want African Americans to fight in the war because it would challenge the idea of what they've said about African American soldiers and people in general, but also because white soldiers don't want to fight alongside black soldiers. In some cases, they don't trust them. In some cases, they feel that they are not quality fighters, and so on and so forth. And we'll talk more about that here in just a minute. W.E.B. Du Bois, again, he said, if this is our country, then this is our war. We must fight it with every ounce of blood and treasure. So this is the feeling that we see of a lot of African Americans at the time, that if they are going to claim this country as their own, then they have to fight for it, and they have to fight for it with everything they have. And so this is what a lot of African Americans are doing at this time in an attempt, again, to earn respect for themselves and for African Americans in general. So there are about 10,000 black troops in the Army and 5,000 in the Navy at the outbreak of the war. So before the war even started, you already see those numbers. The Marines did not at the time admit black men. The new selective service system, and that is the draft. So we still have the draft. That's just what it's called. The selective service system drafted 370,000 black men, 13% of all draftees, which is a pretty high number. It's pretty high considering the overall number of people in the country. But part of this could be considered or due to the fact that none of the draft boards in the entire country had black members, meaning the people responsible for who got drafted did not have any black members. And so we see maybe an over-representation of black troops in the draft. During World War I, the military remained rigidly segregated. So you have these soldiers who are going to come in. You just saw 350,000, 400,000, somewhere in there, 370 exactly in the draft. We see those soldiers who are going to come into the military, but mostly what they are doing is grunt work, maybe, for lack of a better term, which is they were janitors, they were cooks, they were stokers on the ships, meaning putting the coal into the engines and things of that nature. And black officers were trained because the NAACP pushed very hard for this to happen. However, they did remain at lower ranks. At no point in the entire war did any black officer rise above the rank of captain. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Young was one of these very, very high-ranking African Americans. He was qualified to not only lead black troops, which mostly the black officers led the black. Most of them actually didn't even lead, or most black regiments actually weren't even led by blacks, but the officers could only lead black troops. However, Colonel Charles Young had fought in every war. He fought in every situation. He had been stationed in Mexico when we were having a bit of a tussle with them in the early 19-teens. And he was very well known. He was actually qualified to lead black and white troops because of all of his service. However, white men did object to that and refused to allow him to kind of be over them. So essentially people did not want to have a black person over them, in charge of them, and so that didn't work out very well. Black soldiers did not have the same supplies of materials. They wouldn't even give them guns to drill with. So when they were practicing their drills, they had to use brooms and shovels and various other things of that nature. They were not given the same accommodations. They didn't have the same beds. They didn't have the same food, the same barracks, places where they slept and kept all their things. They did not get the same things. White men often failed to salute black officers, so even higher ranking people. Now this is one of those things that you just do in the military. There's no arguing it. You have a higher officer, you salute them, and it's a sign of respect. And it's punishable to not do that. However, not in the case of white officers having to salute black officers, which they did not. And they were not able to join officers' clubs. And when I say that, I mean sort of a social club for officers, where you have the officers who would be able to get together, and African Americans that have become officers were not allowed to join those clubs. Morale among black soldiers was very low because of all of this, and naturally sometimes their performance suffered. In some battles, black soldiers retreated and were punished for cowardice. This is a very highly punishable crime. Deserters and things of that nature, they were challenged. They were all released as far as I'm aware, but they were punished for this particular crime. Not only that, white soldiers would warn the French when they were there, because that's where most of the fighting is taking place. White soldiers would warn the French of the danger posed to white women by black soldiers, and essentially warn the French that their black, I don't know the best term, co-soldiers, that the black soldiers posed a threat to the French white women. However, the vast majority of the French routinely commended their actions and rejected that notion and said that they thought that the black soldiers were very, I don't want to say well-behaved, it makes it potentially sound poor, but they did usually commend their behavior, maybe even in some cases. I don't want to say more so than the other troops, but they did say that they they didn't have that concern. And so African Americans begin to find that France was a place for them where, and this has been the case all the way back to like the earliest time of the country, that France is a place for them where they aren't treated as poorly and they have more opportunities. And so there will be some men that stay there. There will be some women that go there in order to live in France to get better rights than they had here. And so when the war was over, black soldiers are going to return on segregated ships to the same conditions that they saw before the war. Nothing, much like we saw with previous wars, nothing's really changed in that regard. They're still disrespected. They're still mistreated when they get back here. And when they get back here, we see that because the hearts and minds of white Americans had not changed, that not only is there segregation, not only is there discrimination, but now there's a backlash to their movement, to them being, as you talked about, or as you read about with the Great Migration, as opposed to them being in potentially isolation, segregated, or something of that effect. There's actually a violent backlash. This white backlash is going to take hold in the South, including the lynching of 10 black men in uniform in 1919. So not only, again, is it some, they committed a crime or they did this, they did that. We have men who fought for their country going off to earn respect and coming back to this kind of treatment, including being lynched for being black. As black people moved north during the Great Migration, violence is going to erupt and riots are going to occur all over the country, including, and these are just very few, we'll talk about these in the next module, Atlanta, Springfield, East St. Louis, Houston, Chicago, and so on and so on and so on. There's so many very, very violent riots. We see these in 1919. It's a very famous time period for violence, and a lot of it had to do with this treatment that in some cases blacks felt they were owed more respect because they had fought in the war, they had worked in the factories and produced for the war. Now they're moving to their cities, they're living in their neighborhoods, they're taking potentially jobs as the way that they viewed it, and all of this they see and they think to themselves that they don't like black people moving into their territory. And we see a little bit of that here. And this is a quote from Mississippi Senator James K. Vardaman, who says this. It's a pretty long quote, but just pay attention to what he's actually stating here. God Almighty never intended that the Negro should share with the white man in the government of this country. Do not forget that. It matters not what I may say or others may think. It matters not what constitutions may contain or statutes provide. Wherever the Negro is in sufficient numbers to imperil the white man's civilization or question the white man's supremacy, the white man is going to find some way around the difficulty. And that is just as true in the North as it is in the South. You need not deceive yourselves about that. The feeling against the Negro in Illinois when he gets in the white man's way is quite as strong, more bitter, less regardful of the Negro's feelings and conditions than it is in Mississippi. And we kind of see that to be the truth. Blacks kind of had a place in Southern society. It wasn't a good place. It was not good treatment by any stretch of the imagination. We see all sorts of terror happening in the South. But in the North, right, we think that they like blacks better. We know from what we learned about the way that a lot of white men acted during the Civil War towards African Americans who they perceived to be taking their jobs and their positions. We know that what he's saying is kind of true here. And what we see is that as blacks move north, they are treated worse and worse simply because of their race and because they feel like they're being overtaken. And so in so many ways, they move to the north to escape some things. They go and fight a war in an attempt to earn respect. And in so many ways, they don't escape what they're running from. And in some cases, it becomes worse for them. I hope you got some good information out of this. Make sure that you complete the assignment. And after this, you will have your test for Module 4. I hope you have a wonderful day. I will see you later.